Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's session, the FAVE session on 20 years of the Intellectual Freedom Statement. First of all, to introduce myself, my name is Martin Wade, and I'm currently the chair, or outgoing chair, of FAVE. As you're aware, this afternoon's session is being live streamed. If you don't wish to be included in the live stream, if you can sit further back behind the line where the cameras are, behind the main cross passageway, you will be behind the cameras, and so you'll not be included. Also, can you put your phones on silent, but please don't put them away. We're going to take questions at the end of the session and treat them as a panel discussion. If you'd like to ask questions, there will be microphones, but also both in the hall and if you're watching on the live stream, please do use Mentimeter. The instructions are on the screen at the moment, so basically take your mobile device and go to menti.com and enter the code that's on the screen, which is 692965, and that will take you through, and you can ask your question in that way as well. And so we do encourage everybody in the hall and watching the live stream to take part in the questions. If you can ask the questions on Mentimeter at any time, but as I say, we'll take all the questions at the end of the program. So, welcome to our session today. I'm sorry we're a little late starting, but as the opening ceremony overran, we thought it was good to give people a little extra time to come to the hall. But it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today, because freedom of access to information and freedom of expression are core to the work of IFLA. They're firmly embedded in the organization's values and in the organization's statutes. In the statutes are, if I can get this to work, there are two values, the first two values cover this area. First of all, the endorsement of the principles of freedom of access to information, ideas and works of imagination, and freedom of expression embodied in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The second value is the belief that people, communities and organizations need universal and equitable access to information, ideas and works of imagination for their social, educational, cultural, democratic and economic well-being. Just as a reminder, Article 19 of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights I'm sorry, there's a slide missing. I should read it out anyway. The UN Declaration is that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression, and this right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media regardless of frontiers. So 20 years ago, IFLA published its statement on libraries and intellectual freedom, which reflect the values. And they start by, IFLA asserts that a commitment to intellectual freedom is a core responsibility for the library and information profession, and that IFLA therefore calls upon libraries and library staff to adhere to the principles of intellectual freedom, uninhibited access to information, and freedom of expression, and to recognize the privacy of the library user. Since that statement was approved 20 years ago, the opportunities to exercise this freedom, as well as the threats to it, have evolved rapidly. New issues and understandings have emerged which force libraries to reflect on how their values, as well as the statement itself, should be interpreted and applied. And so to mark the 20th anniversary, FAIF is looking at the continued relevance of the statement and considering where, if any, changes may be necessary in order to reflect the times we live in today. So to start the debate, a series of blogs have been published looking at intellectual freedom from a range of perspectives on, there's the Universal Declaration, on Speak Up, which is the FAIF blog. And you can see the URL for the blogs, and I would urge you to have a look at those. They do offer a wide range of views on intellectual freedom today. And so to take the debate further, we've got some great speakers who are going to discuss recent work associated with the Intellectual Freedom Statement. We're starting with two contributions from FAIF committee members. Brent Rowe will talk about the new IFLA statement on censorship, which has been published today. And Louise Cook will describe IFLA's new guidelines on public internet access in libraries, which has also just been published. And then we'll hear from three experts. By video, we'll have a presentation on the threats to freedom of information in Turkey from Ahmed Sabici. Jenny Gebhardt from the Electronic Frontier Foundation will discuss privacy-enhancing technology. And Catherine Steeler, former member of the European Parliament and now Chief Executive of the Open Knowledge Foundation, will talk on open knowledge and open data. As I said before, there'll be time for questions at the end, and I'd ask you to, if you want to ask questions in the hall, keep them till then, or send them by Mentimeter. The information's on the screen there for you. And so I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Brent Rowe. Brent is the University Librarian at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Canada, and he's also he's the outgoing secretary of FAIF, and as he describes it, has held the pen for the censorship statement which has just been published. He began his collaboration with IFLA some years ago when he was Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. And so please welcome Brent Rowe. Thank you.
See if I can do this. Yes, okay. Good afternoon, Kalimera. I'll already go to the next slide. As Martin said, in 1999, 20 years ago, IFLA published its statement on libraries and intellectual freedom, an important document that encourages the world's libraries to promote and defend intellectual freedom. While the statement enjoined libraries to oppose any form of censorship, it did not offer a definition or hint at the inevitable ambiguities encountered at the semantic edges of that concept. This last year, to remedy this small but curious gap in IFLA's library of statements, IFLA's Freedom of Access to Information and Freedom of Expression Committee adopted as one of its projects the composition of an IFLA statement on censorship. I was pleased to be the pen holder in this exercise, but many members of the FAIF committee provided important perspectives and suggestions for the text as it was being developed. And the FAIF committee as a whole discussed and detailed and amended the draft text at its midterm meeting this spring. Then there was some final polishing by IFLA officers and staff. And you can see the URL for the statement which has just been published. In the few minutes that I have today, I would like to just summarize the statement and note some of the considerations that the FAIF committee members dealt with in choosing how to compose this text. So the statement first had to define censorship, because many excellent definitions of censorship already exist, some offered by scholars in the context of their writings, others provided by national library associations in a number of countries. There is, in fact, a vast literature on this topic within and beyond the library world. It's not new. But our committee felt it needed to be both, one, conceptually minimal, leaving to scholars and to more detailed or nationally based association documents the freedom, both retrospectively and prospectively, to articulate the concept in more detail according to their needs, and two, to be linguistically neutral, just in the sense that we did not want to choose a definition already fixed in a given language. Yes, the working language of the committee was English, but the definition we're using is not from, say, the American Library Association, as good as their documents are, to be then just simply translated. So our slim definition then is that censorship is the deliberate limiting on the part of a state or non-state actor of the availability of, access to, or transmission of information or ideas to or among persons. The text then offers some historical and typical forms of censorship as non-exclusive examples of censorship. Some people, or whole library associations, or even IFLA as a whole, may not find these examples a sufficiently complete list. For example, the rating or labeling of works, or the harassment of authors or publishers, or indeed readers, are not mentioned. But we felt that at a world level, in this basic statement, we wanted to focus on the simplest availability of works, or the simplest ability to communicate ideas. The committee then needed to state why censorship is a problem. Here again, we felt that a shortcut around a deep discussion of first principles was in order in such a brief statement. Like certain other key IFLA documents, such as the IFLA Statement on Libraries and Intellectual Freedom itself, this one took its foundation from the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, mentioned by Martin a few minutes ago, and specifically citing, of course, Article 19, which speaks quite directly to the right to freedom of expression, which includes the freedom to seek, receive, impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. We are very aware that some countries that practice censorship on a wide scale are not signatories to the Universal Declaration, but many legal and diplomatic minds have also applied themselves to the question of the applicability of the Universal Declaration to such countries, and we refer others to that broader literature. For our part, in IFLA, in faith, we assume that the Universal Declaration applies to all countries equally. It at least enjoys the explicit approval of the governments of the majority of the world's population. Nevertheless, we did try to suggest why, apart from the Universal Declaration, library professionals might find censorship to be offensive. And we based this on the library principle of equitable access to information, one of the values that Martin mentioned, which is to take nothing away from the more general arguments about the need for access to all viewpoints for full participation in a democratic society for those in such societies, or as the basis of the even more general concept of personal fulfillment. Assuming that it might be implicit in what we did propose, we also did not explicitly make the argument of equitable freedom of expression. If I want to express my opinions, I must also let you express yours. We think that's implicit. Somewhat perversely in this exercise, the committee almost immediately found itself having to struggle, as many have done before, with the limits of freedom, or conversely, instances where some kind of censorship seem, in fact, to be widely tolerated or even seen as necessary in many or most societies. We had to contend with the fact that, on the one hand, we are enjoined to oppose any form of censorship. And on the other hand, none of us was prepared to defend, say, child pornography or out-and-out libel. To deal with this dissonance, we again turn to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for a helpful theoretical shortcut. Article 29, Section 2, presupposes that there may be some acceptable limits on the rights set out in other articles for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and general welfare. But how do we ensure that this article is not used by some governments, for example, to license all kinds and extremities of censorship for their peculiar ideas of morality or public order? Of course, Article 30 of the Declaration comes to the rescue here, reminding us that nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein in the other articles. Essentially, while certain limitations to full freedom of expression or access to information might be envisioned, say to protect children or legitimately private information, this will normally be quite recognizably different from a government's complete blocking of access to major internet search engines, or for political ends, or the removing from libraries of any books written or inspired by thinkers currently out of favor with the government. We also recognize that some kinds of censorship, for example, that entailed in the right to be forgotten legislation in certain countries, is quite ambiguous and almost equally upholds or offends against competing rights, as reflected in IFLA's recent statement on the right to be forgotten, for example. Because censorship in some restricted circumstances and in some measured forms is a tolerated reality in all societies, our committee chose not to repeat in the present draft statement a call to oppose all censorship. Where that appears, that stands. Instead, we opted to note that IFLA emphatically argues for principles of freedom of expression and freedom of access to information, and to urge the whole library community to do the same. Again, as in many IFLA statements, we proposed a number of recommendations for library professionals, libraries, and library associations. I won't list them here, you can read them. Some of these inevitably repeat recommendations already in the IFLA Statement on Libraries and Intellectual Freedom, still as valid today as it was 20 years ago. Inevitably, the possible list is not complete. For example, we did not include a recommendation to libraries to have local censorship policies in place as an aid to dealing with book removal requests, though we probably should have. As an aid to situations, this statement on censorship within the context of key documents of the United Nations and of IFLA that already exist as an aid to handle situations, this statement on censorship, which sits within the context of key documents of the United Nations and IFLA that already exist, offers a fuller list of examples both of censorship that is almost certainly acceptable and of censorship that is de facto widely tolerated. To do this, we assembled two short annexes to the statement text. While it might have been very interesting also to add a third annex to consider or at least note some censorship issues beyond those already noted, we decided that the document was already long for this kind of IFLA statement. Examples of such issues that might have gone in a third annex might be the relationship between the form of government in a country and censorship or freedom of expression practices. The question of whether any society could freely and legitimately choose for itself deep limitations on the freedom of access to information or the freedom of expression. I think not. The role of parents and teachers in governing the access to information of children or adolescents. The importance of restraint, good taste, la bonne séance, or respect for the cultural or religious sensitivities of others in the exercise of freedom of expression in the absence of censorship, and so on. Censorship, like its more positive obverse, the freedom of access to information and the freedom of expression, is a concept that has been discussed by many great minds in many societies for many centuries of human history. Here in this city, there was a memorable trial about 2,500 years ago. An official IFLA statement on censorship can only be somewhat definitive by also being rather general. Like any complex topic, it is easy for a contrarian, whatever their motivation, to say yes but at almost any line in such a statement. We hope, however, that the statement just published, whatever its exact formulation, will be helpful guidance to the library community, suggesting what we mean, even if so short a formulation limits on how we can say it. So thank you, and Efkaristo.
Is that any better? Oh, third time lucky. I was fooled, the little light was on, so if there's a light on, I thought it was working. Our next speaker is Louise Cook, who is also a member of the Faith Committee. Louise is a Professor of Information and Knowledge Management and Deputy Head of Information Management Discipline Group in the School of Business and Economics at Loughborough University. That must be one of the longer job descriptions. Louise, as I say, is member of the IFLA Faith Committee and is also editor of the IFLA Guidelines on Public Internet Access in Libraries. It was drafted by the Faith Committee and has recently been launched this week. And so Louise will talk about the background and the guidelines themselves. So if you'd like to welcome Louise Cook.
Thank you, Martin. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good. Okay. Hello, it's a real pleasure to be here today to be able to present the new IFLA Faith Guidelines on Public Internet Access in Libraries. I'm planning in this presentation to give a bit of background to the context and the drafting of the guidelines, their importance in supporting the IFLA Statement on Libraries and Intellectual Freedom, and an outline of some of the key principles in the guidelines. It will necessarily be quite a high-level overview because of time, so a lot of the detail and examples of good practice that feature in the guidelines I won't be able to cover. As providers of public access to the internet, librarians and information professionals are required to balance their professional commitment to intellectual freedom, human rights, and their personal values with regard to censorship, with the need to operate within the limits of local, national, and supranational legal frameworks. They also face issues of pressure from their local community with regard to adhering to community norms and standards, which will often lead to the use of restrictive filtering and blocking measures. On the other hand, By providing the widest and least fettered public access to the internet, they're able to play an important role in reducing digital exclusion and promoting digital creativity. The guidelines are intended to support practitioners in resolving this difficult balancing issue. As Martin has highlighted, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the IFLA Statement on Libraries and Intellectual Freedom, and as you can see, it calls upon librarians to uphold the principles of access to information and freedom of expression, and to respect the privacy of the user. But critically, it prioritizes the duty towards the user over that of the duty towards the employer. However, arguably, when it comes to provision of public internet access, the tendency to date has been towards regulation, restriction, and caution above the values of openness and freedom of exploration. The guidelines have been drafted in such a way as to support library and information professionals through the provision of a set of principles and practical guidance, rather than a prescriptive set of actions, as it's recognised that there will always be a need for some variance of practice according to local circumstances and cultural context. They're intended to help librarians build users' abilities to use the internet in a responsible and confident manner. In drafting them, they were informed by quite extensive research and were also subject to a quite extensive international consultation exercise, including with the different IFLA sections. I'll now move on to give a brief outline of some of the key provisions of the guidelines. With regard to the principles behind them, we're clear that the benefits of the internet and legal and ethical rights to freedom of access to information should form the overriding principles behind provision of public access to the internet. It should be recognised that libraries are a unique resource for access to information, ideas, and communications, providing universal personal, social, cultural, and economic opportunities for all communities. They have a positive role to play in reducing digital exclusion and social inequalities. All libraries providing public internet access should have an internet use policy. This should set out roles and responsibilities, including those for end users, the purposes and for whom access is provided, any limits on usage, procedures for securing access, and for managing and the consequences of misuse of access, assistance and guidance available for users, procedures for managing problems and complaints with the service, and legal compliance relevant to the service. The policies should be developed in consultation with a wide range of stakeholders and should always remain mindful of the principles of public access outlined in the previous slide. We're suggesting that public internet access in libraries should be provided free of charge. Access to online information is the equivalent to the conventional reference library, and therefore should, wherever possible, be made available free of charge to users. Libraries are spaces for the exchange of ideas and the facilitation of learning and creativity, and this can be enhanced through access free of charge for the communication of ideas, the dissemination of information and knowledge, and participation in networks of shared interests. Such participation can play an important role in improving well-being and the fundamental dignity of human life. Library services must be transparent about any restrictions to access and about any personal data held, including that on internet usage. These provisions should be explained clearly in the internet use policy. Library staff should be trained appropriately in order to be able to inform and explain such issues to users. When it comes to the use of filtering software, the guidelines recognise that there may be some instances where the use of filtering software cannot be avoided, based on legality of content and appropriateness within the social and cultural context in which content is accessed. This contrasts somewhat with the position of the American Library Association, but is a pragmatic response to what we know from research is taking place in practice. It's recognised, however, that filtering software is an inaccurate and imperfect solution that can lead to under and over blocking and should not be relied on as a single solution to the provision of public internet access. Librarians should always advocate for the lowest levels of filtering feasible within their own context. Where filtering software is used, users should be empowered to request unblocking of sites and staff empowered to undertake this. The process should be undertaken in a way that respects the dignity of the user. For example, instead of an access denied warning, a polite response that says, please see a member of staff if you wish to continue to accessing this site, will be much less intimidating to a potential user. The IFLA statement on libraries and intellectual freedom also places responsibility on librarians for protecting privacy of use of library services. Simple measures such as the use of privacy screens remove the need to press for higher levels of filtering on the grounds of avoidance of offence to other users. Surveillance and monitoring of users' access should be kept to the absolute minimum necessary to ensure effective management and legal compliance. In addition, all users should be made aware of any surveillance or monitoring measures in place. The functional needs of people with disabilities must be remembered in accordance with rights recognised by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This entails the use of assistive technologies and ensuring that content provided by the library meets web accessibility standards. Services should engage and consult regularly with their user community and make provision accordingly to ensure that the service is genuinely accessible to all users, including those with disabilities. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child asserts that governments must help protect children from materials that could harm them. However, while the importance of safeguarding minors is recognised, this shouldn't be used as a justification for excessive levels of filtering. Instead, we suggest that the provision of effective user education, including the education of parents, is the most effective way to enable children to use the internet safely and avoid harm. With regard to user education, librarians and information professionals play a key role in enabling their users to get optimum benefit from the information available on the internet. User education should include the skills of media and information literacy, That is being able to evaluate the appropriateness, the accuracy, the currency, authenticity, and so on of information. And importantly, being able to distinguish between misinformation and disinformation, such as fake news. In addition, staff should receive regular and frequent training with regard to usage policy and understanding any restrictions on access and how to unblock restrictions, as well as on how to provide education sessions for users, parents, and caregivers. Staff should be trained on effective pedagogical practice in teaching users about internet access in order best to empower and support communities. More senior personnel should be provided with training to gain advocacy skills and a deeper understanding of the public policy issues and specific legislation relating to privacy, intellectual freedom, intellectual property rights, human rights, protection of minors, cybersecurity, and so on. When it comes to social media, although primary responsibility for use of social media by children should rest with parents and guardians, providing media literacy education for young people can be a useful way to ensure that they're able to gain enjoyment, connection, pleasure, and learning from new media without detriment to their own safety. Libraries can offer support by including links for reporting harmful and abusive content, as well as on guidance as to where to get further help. The exponential growth in ownership of mobile devices implies that increasingly the more economic and cost-effective direction for libraries in both developing and developed countries will be to shift the balance of provision to Wi-Fi. We suggest that the same principles regarding unhindered access should apply with regard to Wi-Fi provision as to static access. Decisions concerning the management of public internet access are necessarily sensitive and context-dependent. It's recognised in the guidelines that local considerations and community norms will inevitably play a part in determining what will work in a specific setting. All relevant stakeholders should be encouraged to take part in the decision-making process. And the final clause relates to review and stakeholder engagement. Policies should be seen as dynamic and not static entities. Library services should review their public internet access policies on a regular basis. They should engage and consult with relevant local and national agencies, such as professional bodies, IFLA, internet safety NGOs, etc., as well as any other key stakeholders and end users when reviewing such policies. So, in summary, the guidelines are there to help and support you and your service in making difficult decisions with regard to public internet access. They're intended to be an evolving tool that can be used for training and advocacy purposes, as well as a decision support tool. We'd strongly welcome your feedback on their usefulness, and we'd also welcome any examples of good practice from your own organisation. We'd also welcome offers to help translate, because we'd like to make them available in other languages as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Our third speaker is joining us from Turkey and is a video presentation. Ahmet Sabuncu is a freelance writer and a journalist and social critic who focuses on issues around internet, freedom of expression, and information and technology. He's also working to improve the situation of journalism in Turkey in the platform called NewsLab Turkey, which he's one of the co-founders of, and its newsletter editor. And so I'd like to hand over onto the video connection to Ahmed Sabanci.
Hello, everyone.
Hello there.
Can you hear me? First of all, I have to note that I am so excited to talk a group of librarians because, like, it's one of the most important and most admirable professions in the world, at least for me. So, being invited to talk in a conference like that is something really special for me. So, I will be talking about the situation of the freedom of information in Turkey and what type of threats we are facing in here and what can be done about in this situation. In general, I have 3 different categories in freedom of information threats in Turkey. One of them is the censorship and law-based threats. Other is the economical threats, which is media censorship and how the money about the freedom of information or in general cultural ecosystem works. And the other one is how these affects cultural side of the situation, how this turns into a self-censorship or how it affects the cultural production in the country. First of all, I want to summarize the censorship in Turkey and what's currently happening in here. First of all, the internet censorship is I think, most famous one in the world when it comes to Turkey. We have the famous law called 5651, also called the Internet Censorship Law, which was first introduced in the early 2010s and updated in 2014. And this law gives government an unlimited power to both censor the internet and also all kinds of internet connection in the public. According to the latest research, right now we have more than 245,000 websites blocked in Turkey, which this number is actually published in the end of 2018, so it's possible that we have more than 250,000 websites blocked in Turkey right now. These websites can differ in many ways, like some of them are erotic or pornographic websites, some of them are other types of not suitable for children or not suitable for general public type of websites, but also there are many interesting websites blocked through this law, such as Wikipedia, which in 2 days will be blocked in 850 days. For example, image sharing website, Imagure, or text sharing website, Pastebin, are blocked through this law, and most of the times court orders doesn't really explain why these websites are blocked. So we are always left in the dark. We don't know why these websites are blocked. We don't know how the owners or the general public can fight against this type of censorship. But we all know that courts can easily block any kind of websites. That's why most of the time this law also used against the political opposition. As a famous example, a labor-focused left-wing news site called Sendika.org so far has been blocked by the courts 63 times. Every time they were censored, they bought a new domain and the courts blocked the new domain again. So right now they are using Sendika63.org to reach the public. Other than that, we have many examples similar to that, like there are many websites or news sites blocked more than several times. And also through this internet censorship law, Turkish government and Turkish courts orders the big platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to remove content or at least block that content to Turkey in many situations. And most of these are either political opposition accounts or tweets or other types of culturally sensitive content, which is one of the biggest excuses used in Turkey to internet censorship, unfortunately. Also, after the 2016 coup attempt in Turkey, Turkish government and the president used decrees for censorship in many times. Through the decrees, more than 30 book publishers and more than 100 news outlets has been shut down. And one of the side effects of the closing down of those book publishers was that all of their books, no matter what they were published, has been collected from the libraries, bookstores, and this caused more than 135,000 books to be removed from libraries. So when people want to go to read about what those groups were talking about and what those ideas were, they had no chance to reach any kind of information, whether any group can say that this is dangerous or this is not suitable for public. I believe that every book at least should be stay in the libraries for general public to decide whether this idea is good or bad. But unfortunately, our government uses censorship to make sure that only the ideas they deem suitable to public to stay reachable. Also, there were recent arguments about censorship of the broadcasting platforms such as Netflix or YouTube or other types of streaming platforms because those were not controlled like the Turkish TV or radio, which is censored in really ridiculous ways. So in the last month, government published a new regulation which basically told the governing organization who regulates TV and radio that you are going to regulate Netflix too. So when people ran away from the TV because they were not able to see different ideas or different information on the TV, now they are also have to find another way because soon the government will be also regulating the places like Netflix and YouTube. And most importantly, which I believe most of you heard about, that journalism is in a really bad situation in Turkey. More than hundreds of journalists in jail, mostly through the made-up charges such as terrorism links or leaking secret information. And most of the time, these courts or these claims are totally empty. They don't have any proof, but yet we have more than 100 journalists in jail. They are not allowed to publish anything, and others either has to act carefully when they are writing something or has to flee Turkey, which is unfortunately a new trend in Turkey. We see that many academics, many journalists who should be freely creating new works and new information for the public has to flee Turkey because they are not able to do that while they are living here. So this is mostly the government side and how laws are used to control and threaten the freedom of information. But we also have the economic side, which is basically owning the media through the powerful businessmen or other groups to make sure that mainstream media, mainstream television, or mainstream publishers are all controlled or owned by the businessmen or business organizations which are close to the government. And unfortunately, right now, we have most of the mainstream media which is controlled by 2 or 3 different conglomerates which are all has close ties with the current ruling party in Turkey, and they are making sure that they will only publish the kind of information, the kind of ideas which are okay with the current ruling party in Turkey, which is Erdogan's AKP. And this unfortunately causes a real problem because, first of all, when you open a TV or when you want to buy a newspaper, there is not much you can find as a information diversity, because most of the columnists, most of the editors are more than publishing as diverse information as possible, trying to keep their jobs. So that means they have to censor themselves, they have to publish news articles or opinion pieces which are okay with the government, and if you are not going this way, you either lose your job or they will make sure that you are not able to spread your ideas or publish your ideas. And one of the side effects of this media ownership is those groups, those business groups also own the distribution channels and bookstores. So what this means is that basically, if they want, they can just stop selling the books from a publisher or books from a specific author, or they can just decide that they are not going to distribute the X newspaper or X magazine from now on. And actually, we are seeing examples of this. For example, there are cities which only has 1 or 2 big bookstores owned by these business groups, and the books and magazines they are distributing through these stores are quite limited, and actually there is no way for people other than the buying books from online, which is, although we have a good internet use in Turkey, most of the people are still not really comfortable with buying things online, especially when it comes to things like books and other stuff. So they are also limiting the spread of information, spread of cultural products like books, music, movies, and all kinds of stuff through their distribution channel, through their ownership. And this also, the economical pressure also has been used in different ways, such as limiting the advertisement to the opposition channels, limiting the advertisement to the publishers who are not clearly supporting the current government. So this also pushes them to the edges, or most of the time they are having hard time economically to publish new works or publish new issues. So basically, other than the laws and regulations, we also have an economic pressure over the freedom of information. And with all of this, through the years, which we are experiencing this censorship and pressure in Turkey, over the Turkish public in almost more than 10 years, this also caused a cultural change. And this change also caused self-censorship and cultural pressure, public pressure over the creators and over the information workers, which also can be counted like not just writers and journalists and artists, but also the librarians, teachers, bookstore owners, because we are experiencing many times when you are giving a space to the opposing ideas or different ideas, most of the time there will be a backlash. Like there are examples of teachers getting in trouble because of the books they have recommended. Or there are times we see that just because of an article they wrote, people are attacking, or not even an article, most of the time their tweet can get you in trouble because of the public pressure. And this causes a big self-censorship in Turkey, and most of the time people are scared to talk their minds or discuss different ideas in public. With all of this, since we are talking about the libraries, unfortunately, in Turkey, although the Turkish Librarian Association tries its best to do good work for Turkish public and to freedom of information, unfortunately, the libraries in Turkey are dealing with most of these troubles too. They are having budget problems. Most of the libraries in Turkey are not fully equipped in many ways. both in the manpower and also the technological and book-wise, and also they also experience that public pressure, because I believe there are librarians who are afraid of that situation, that backlash, which I exampled in the teachers, through teachers. So that's basically the situation in Turkey, but although it seemed like I painted a dark picture, thankfully, like, there are many people, there are writers, journalists, librarians, artists, and teachers who are trying their best to defend the freedom of information in Turkey and make sure that this backlash and this pressure would not be fully effective and create a totalitarian society in Turkey. I think my time is almost over. Thank you so much for listening to me. And that's all.
Thank you very much for that very informative and interesting paper, and we appreciate Ahmed joining us by video. Our fourth speaker is from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Jenny Gebhardt. Jenny is Associate Director of Research at the Electronic Frontier Foundation in San Francisco, where she conducts and manages research and advocacy on consumer privacy and security. Prior to joining EFF, she worked with university libraries in Laos and Thailand as a loose scholar and produced research on web censorship, public internet access, and digital literacy in Southeast Asia. So I'd like to welcome Jenny Gebhardt.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, or if you are as jet-lagged as I am right now, good middle of the night. But hopefully I will keep all of us awake, including me, by talking about this question that we're asking today. What does intellectual freedom and its defense look like? And the answer that I will give you that comes from my own work is that intellectual freedom and its defense relies on encryption. It relies on privacy, protecting technologies that maintain that space to express and think and inquire freely. To briefly introduce myself, Jenny Gebhardt, the Associate Director of Research at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. To keep us going on time, I'll just say briefly, I used to work in libraries. I have an MLIS. I am so happy to be with you all today because I very rarely get to hang out with so many librarians in my job. Currently, I am working sort of as a librarian outside the library. I work at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a member-supported nonprofit in San Francisco, California, the United States, working kind of in three main areas protecting digital rights and civil liberties. And these are the areas we work in: security and privacy, freedom of expression, and specific to the United States, free speech. And then an area that I think falls under IFLA's kind of copyright and other legal matters area, looking at copyright, patents, and how overbroad practices there can stifle innovation and creativity and access to information. Now, in these very broad areas covering digital rights, my expertise is mostly in security and privacy, and that's where I'm going to direct my comments today. To me, this idea of freedom of access to information and freedom of expression, the connection between that and security and privacy is really two sides of the same coin. I see them as two different approaches to answering the same questions. Questions like, what is the right balance of information openness and information restriction? How do we use that balance? How does it change when we consider different power dynamics? How do these two seemingly opposing forces of locking information down and opening it up work together to support individual autonomy and democracy and community in different situations? And of course, the statement that we are discussing today, the IFLA statement, enshrines that relationship between faith and privacy, saying that library users have the right to personal privacy and anonymity, and further outlining librarians' role, that librarians and other staff shall not disclose the identity of users, shall protect their anonymity, and shall not disclose the materials that they use, the resources they're taking advantage of in the library, to a third party. So in this presentation, I'll briefly outline 3 large, kind of high-level security and privacy trends that I see in my own work, talk a bit about how they connect to this area of freedom of access to information and freedom of expression, and then share a few things that I think librarians and libraries can do to join that fight and really enhance that fight for privacy-enhancing technologies. So let's begin with a victory. Let's begin with good news, and that is HTTPS. So many of you might know there are 2 ways for a web page to get to your browser. One is HTTP that you often see, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and one is HTTPS, and the S there stands for secure. So HTTP on its own has a lot of problems. Eavesdropping, content hijacking and injection, targeted, very efficient censorship are all problems with HTTP. So if I'm using that, anyone from the local Wi-Fi cafe snoop to my ISP to a government can eavesdrop and surveil what I'm doing. They can even inject content to change what I'm seeing, and they can very efficiently target what I'm looking at and censor or block it. HTTPS fixes a good amount of these problems. So sort of, what does this look like? Sort of a contrived example of a fake browsing history. Let's say somebody has a health condition, they're browsing for support groups on Facebook, they're reading Wikipedia articles about treatment, they're learning about politicians who might affect healthcare around their condition, they're reading news, they're watching YouTube videos, they're going to the library to check out books about what they're looking at. Yeah. With HTTPS, all of that disappears. When I'm using HTTPS, everything after the slash will not be visible to the local cafe Wi-Fi snoop or to a government. So this has 2 big impacts on privacy and on anti-censorship. For privacy, everything after that slash is not visible to eavesdroppers. You can't inject content into it, you can't see what I'm doing. Right? I can't tell, is this person looking at cat videos or are they planning a revolution? It is unclear. I can just see they're on all these mixed-use websites. And for censorship, HTTPS is also really beneficial in fighting censorship. With only HTTP, say a government that would like to censor can see specific pages in a site and then can target those specific pages and block only those pages. So for example, a Wikipedia article on a politician, perhaps an article that's quite critical, with HTTP, a government could go in, block only that page on Wikipedia and leave the rest of it up. With HTTPS, that's no longer technically possible. With HTTPS, a government that would like to censor has 2 choices. They can either leave the entire website up or they can take it all off the internet in their country, which is often politically untenable. So for both privacy and fighting censorship, HTTPS is a big win. And the good news here is that its deployment across the internet is increasing. Just in 2017, 2 years ago, about 50% of web traffic on Firefox and Chrome, according to their measurements, was HTTPS. That was pretty good. It was a little more than half. Fast forward to today, just 2 years later, and we're up to 70, 80, 90% of page loads on Firefox and on Chrome, here broken down by a few countries, are HTTPS. This is such a massive transformation in privacy and preserving access to information on the web. And so what librarians can do is join this revolution if you have not already. Use HTTPS for your library's website. This used to be a very complicated and sometimes even costly process. Now it is relatively easy and it's free. This is CertBot, a service maintained by my organization to help usually system administrators or webmasters, whoever is managing your website, configure it's called a certificate for HTTPS and turn it on their website. This is kind of for protecting the browsing privacy of your patrons. This is such a big bang for your buck step to take. And again, it is free, which is fantastic. So the next example of a security and privacy trend that I see impacting faith is the crypto wars between sort of law enforcement and technology providers, and how end-to-end encryption fits into that. This is a map of countries in the world that have, either in legislation or in policy and regulation, some kind of requirement that online service providers assist authorities and law enforcement when they want access to encrypted communications. This sometimes goes by the name of encryption backdoors, or responsible encryption, or exceptional access. But whatever it's called and wherever it's happening, the idea is the same. And that's that law enforcement or governments would like access to end-to-end encrypted communications. But the nature of end-to-end encryption means that it is mathematically impossible for anyone but the sender and the recipients of a message to intercept and read that message. So briefly, how end-to-end encryption works, it's sort of exactly how it sounds. The message is encrypted from end to end. So say from my phone, one end, to my friend that I'm sending a message to their phone. Every step of the way, from my phone to a company's servers, on that company's servers, and then from the servers to the recipient's phone, the message is fully encrypted. It can't be intercepted. It can't be decrypted. It can't be read or accessed. This is sometimes confused with something called transit layer encryption, which is also a security measure, but nowhere near as secure as end-to-end encryption. And transit layer encryption means that while the message is in transit, moving from my phone to the company's servers, moving from the company's servers to my friend's phone, it's encrypted. But on the company's servers, they can read the message. They could, for example, hand it over to law enforcement in response to a request. So end-to-end encryption fills that gap, which is critical. So for example, if I'm texting my friend on WhatsApp, and the government or law enforcement comes to WhatsApp and asks to see my messages, WhatsApp can honestly say that they can't access them and they can't read them. This is such a critical measure for preserving that space for freedom of expression and freedom of thought. And so it's quite concerning to see so many continued government efforts to break that guarantee. With that in mind, one thing that librarians can do in this space is get to know popular messaging apps. One thing I see a lot in my work, both at the Electronic Frontier Foundation and volunteering at libraries, is that big messaging apps, big tech companies are grabbing headlines all the time. We're also seeing more and more government proposals to break those messaging apps. And so patrons will sometimes come to the library or to their librarians with questions and concerns. They see a lot of misinformation on this topic that can lead to fear, uncertainty, doubt, and even panic about the tools they're using. So I encourage librarians, depending on who your community is and who your patrons are, to learn a bit about these different communications options. I put a couple logos up here of well-known end-to-end encrypted apps, looking at WhatsApp, Signal, Wire, and iMessage. But it's important to remember that depending on where you are, those might not be the right choice. Instead of looking just for what are the most famous apps, instead of looking just for end-to-end encryption, although it's extremely important, there are some other, maybe even more important contextual questions to ask. Things like, does an app have a large user base in your country? Not only does that give people someone to talk to, the most secure messaging app in the world is useless if no one else is using it, but it also provides some cover. If a lot of people, a lot of different people with different professions and different lives use this app also, it doesn't say anything about you, compared to, in some countries, for example, Signal is generally used only by activists and journalists, so that's the perception of it. So having that app on your phone that's not so widely used and doesn't have a wide user base could actually put you in danger. Other questions to ask, who owns and maintains and runs an app? Where is it based and how does that relate to where you are in the world? Has it been in the news lately? What sources are reporting on, say, a backdoor or a vulnerability or a problem? Do you trust those sources, and what do others, say, members of civil society say about it? And finally, as far as just kind of advising patrons, your own staff, and even informing your own use, what are some communication alternatives? End-to-end encryption or even a phone app is not the right option for everyone, and it's important to sort of look at these communications more holistically to best address the different threats or risks that people face. And on the topic of government requests, end-to-end encrypted messages are not the only type of information that governments are after. Governments will often knock on the door of libraries looking for patron information, looking for browsing or lending or activity information. And so my call to libraries is to maintain policies and procedures for government requests. This is going to look radically different in different places, but there are still some key questions to ask regardless. For example, is it possible to notify users? Can you notify a person if and when their government is requested, if and when their information is requested? Can you tell them why? Can you tell them what government body or agency requested it? Can you even go beyond that and inform the public and be publicly transparent about government requests that your institution may receive? If you receive an overbroad request or a request that mandates that you be silent about it, can you resist that? Is legal counsel available to consult? Again, the answers to these will be different in different places and at different times. Sometimes the answer might be a resounding no, and then I think you all will know the right questions to ask better than I will. But the main point remains: have a plan, have policies and procedures in place to protect your users and to protect your staff. Now, the final kind of trend I want to highlight of how privacy and security is interacting on a broad scale with access to information and expression is corporate surveillance. And I'd like to bring you an example from our good friends at LinkedIn that kind of encapsulates this tenet of providing services. In a library, no one should be forced to expose their information in order to use a resource or use a service. Our friends at LinkedIn seem to disagree. So about 4 or 5 years ago, major technology and professional networking company LinkedIn bought Lynda, a very popular learning and education platform that libraries around the world use. They now call it LinkedIn Learning with lynda.com content. It's still Lynda, but the new thing is they kind of more aggressively merge these platforms together is that LinkedIn is now requiring library patrons who want to use Lynda to create a LinkedIn account. What does that mean? That means that a user will have to hand over their first name, their last name, and their email address to LinkedIn. LinkedIn will then make that information public by default. It will show up in Google searches. And if you refuse that, if a user or a library thinks that's not a good deal, and it isn't, they will no longer have access to lynda.com resources. The reason that LinkedIn says they're doing this is for security. They say they're trying to prevent Lynda and library resources from being compromised by bots and want to make sure they're only being used by real people. And to me, that's such an insult to libraries. Libraries already take steps to authenticate their users, and that is not LinkedIn's job. LinkedIn, of course, reassures us that if a user does not like that their information is now publicly available, the user can go into their LinkedIn settings and set their profile to private, which we all know no one is going to do. So we've already seen a lot of pushback to this. In the United States already, upwards of 40 libraries and library systems are threatening to cancel their subscription with LinkedIn and Lynda. We've seen statements from the California State Librarian and from the American Library Association saying that this is not an acceptable trade-off. This is not something that librarians are willing to do to their users for access to this resource. And this really illustrates one of the problems that I see the most often when consulting with librarians. How do we protect users and maintain their privacy while still providing services from third-party vendors? And the overall answer is push those third-party vendors to match the library's privacy policies and practices. At a bare minimum, that means making sure that whatever third-party services you're using are getting users explicit opt-in consent to use a third-party service and expose any kind of information to it. But that's just the bare minimum. Beyond that, librarians can take so much more control over how users are interacting with these services. You can go in and kind of try to configure your own default privacy settings that users will be presented with so they don't have to do it. You can consult regular reviews and audits of the policies and practices of different third-party vendors and of the options should they fall short. And finally, as we're seeing happen with LinkedIn, if those negotiations fail, if options are not made available, if pushing a vendor to match practices fails, then if possible, we have to walk. And for a lot of libraries, I know this isn't possible. Resources are tight. A product like Lynda is well-liked and incredibly useful to some of the most marginalized users of a lot of libraries. And so libraries are kind of stuck in an impossible choice sometimes. Either we take away this very valuable service, or we continue to provide Lynda, but at the cost of privacy. And either way, some freedom of access to information, freedom of anonymous, unfettered access to information is compromised. So in this case, and what we're happy to be seeing in the United States at least, is that some of the biggest and most well-resourced libraries are standing up and they're saying, this isn't okay, LinkedIn. And the other third-party vendors that are watching will hopefully get the message as this campaign continues that it does not pay to violate library users' privacy. On the topic of corporate surveillance, another type of corporate tracking to look out for is third-party tracking. Even if your library does not have a vendor contract with Facebook or Google, they are still probably surveilling your users and tracking them when they go on the library computers to browse the web. Luckily, there are really big and also free steps we can take to not defeat third-party tracking, although that would be wonderful today, but at least to minimize its impact on users overall. So a few things you can do. Look at the default browser that you offer. I'm a big fan of Firefox, but it can depend on what the library's tech system is and what's popular in your community. But look at the default browser, look at what options you can make available on computers. And from there, look at other defaults. Look at whether Google and Bing are the default search engine when you go browsing, or if you can perhaps make it DuckDuckGo, an alternative search engine that is much more privacy protective. DuckDuckGo doesn't save your searches, it doesn't serve you ads based on your searches, and so that's a great default to look for if you can. You can also look at options to add extensions or plugins to browsers to further kind of privacy harden what you're offering to users. So a few extensions I'll recommend. Two are from my own organization. One is Privacy Badger, which blocks the third-party trackers that it sees following you around the web. One is HTTPS Everywhere, that makes sure that whenever a website offers HTTPS, your browser is taking advantage of it. And then also for more ad blocking and tracker blocking, uBlock Origin and Disconnect are two great options. Now the sum of this work of changing the defaults, of pushing providers, is kind of setting the defaults and making the privacy choices so that your users don't have to. You know, users trust us to maintain this privacy protected space in the library, and there are all these small ways that really add up over time that we can do that. So finally, I'll share a couple resources from EFF. If you want more information about some of the topics I covered here, or about the many, many security and privacy topics we didn't have time for, these are the places to look. So the first resource is called Surveillance Self-Defense. That's EFF's guide to maintaining your own personal digital security and privacy online. We have kind of general guides for thinking through what your risks are and how to best address them, all the way to step-by-step tutorials for installing and using certain tools. So this is a great resource to share with patrons, to use yourself and for your staff. The other resource that I'm really excited to tell you about is called the Security Education Companion. And this is a resource for educators, teachers, librarians, any community member who wants to teach and share some of these digital security concepts and tools. And this is an educational resource, so it has lessons plans, handouts, graphics, teacher guides, and different things that'll help you teach this and run workshops and even kind of find community members to teach it as well. So with that, I thank you all so much for being here. I thank you for the work that you're doing, and I look forward to any questions you have.
Thank you. Our final speaker today is Catherine Steeler. Catherine is Chief Executive Officer of the Open Knowledge Foundation and was formerly an MEP for Scotland. The Open Knowledge Foundation is a global non-profit network that promotes and shares information at no charge, both including content and data. And as I say, she was an MEP from 1999 to 2019. And so I'd like to welcome Catherine Steeler, our final speaker.
Thank you so much, Martin, and it's It's great to be here. Martin and I actually were in the first time I ever met Martin was with a Carnegie Trust visit to New York 2 years ago, looking at data privacy in libraries, and it's a great pleasure to share a platform with him today. Well, my name's Catherine Styler. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Open Knowledge Foundation. I recently represented Scotland in the European Parliament for 20 years, so I led on copyright reform, and that's how I got involved in the open world. And I just want to share a fact about myself, is that I live in a place called Dunfermline, and it was there that the very first Carnegie Library was built and set up. And I just wanted, when we're talking a little bit about modernisation of libraries, I just wanted to share a picture with you, because this is what the new Carnegie Library looks like today. It's won a building award, it's now got the museum, it has different things of offer, but it's about how we can modernise even the very, very first Carnegie Library into something which is quite different than maybe what people have first envisaged. But the mission of the Open Knowledge Foundation is to create a more open world, a world where non-personal information is open, free for everyone to use, build on and share, and where creators and innovators are fairly recognised and rewarded. And since our inception in 2004, we've pioneered the understanding and open licensing information. We have created enabling people to be able to do things. We have been able to use CCAN, which is an open source portal, and evaluated the availability and quality of government open data worldwide using our Global Open Data Index. But we live in a time where technological advances offer incredible opportunities for us all. And this is a time that we should be hopeful about the future and to inspire those who want to build a better society. Governments across the world must now work harder to give everyone access to information and the ability to use it to understand and shape their lives, as well as making powerful institutions more accountable and ensuring vital research and information that can help us tackle climate change, such as poverty, climate change, and all of those things are available to us all. But in short, if we want to achieve some of these things, we need to have a fair, free, and open future. And this is not the way we saw our speaker just earlier talking about what's happening in Turkey. This is not what is going on, certainly in the UK, the EU, the US, China, and across our world. Instead, we see, certainly in the UK, councils cutting libraries, and the estimate in 2017 was that 120 libraries closed in England, Wales and in Scotland. Thousands of jobs have been lost, with libraries existing today just because of volunteers taking time. But closing down a library has to be one of the most short-sighted decisions that public officials can take, with serious consequences for the future of local communities. There's a widespread misconception that the services offered are out of date. And as I said before, if you look at my local library, it certainly is not out of date. But a recent study by the Carnegie UK Trust found that people aged 15 to 24 in England are the most likely age group to use libraries. That's 15 to 24-year-olds, most likely age group to use libraries. And nearly half of people aged 25 to 34 still visit libraries, according to that study. So to date, the most successful libraries, as you all know, have remodelled themselves to become fit for purpose for the 21st century, and more can follow suit if they receive the right support and advice and have the backing of governments and councils. And as I said, as a former MEP who founded the European Parliament's all-party library group, I'm delighted to be here today in my new capacity as the Chief Executive of the Open Knowledge Foundation. As experts in opening up knowledge, we help governments, universities and civil society organisations reach their full potential by providing them with skills and tools to publish, use and understand data. And this is why we recently joined forces with a group of think tanks, civil and learned societies in the UK to call on the government in the UK to commit in its up-and-coming national data strategy to invest in digital skills needed to convert the growing amount of data into real information that can be acted upon. We believe that the UK government should help empower the wider workforce by instigating or backing fundamental data literacy and practice training programmes open to local communities working in a range of fields to strengthen data demand, use and understanding. Such a programme could form part of a government response to a recent call for improved technical education and increased investment in adult learning. It could be jointly coordinated in the UK by Department for Education, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. And libraries could be perfect locations for offering such training. Data literacy in practice is an area we care deeply about in the Open Knowledge Foundation. Since its launch in 2012, our School of Data team has trained thousands of people across the world and across 4 continents to use data for good. In our advice to the government, we also called on the public sector to pioneer new ways of producing and harnessing citizen-generated data, efforts by organising through citizen science projects, through libraries, churches and community groups. These local communities can help the government to collect high-quality data, but also it could turn around and actually make sure that the data that's locally publicly available through community data banks could also be there. So it would be about creating new data and allowing existing data to be built upon, shared and used to the best of our ability, and addressing local problems where local needs are. I love the description used in IFLA's 1999 statement on libraries and intellectual freedom, saying that libraries are gateways to knowledge, thought and culture. I've long championed the importance of coding and data practice as part of the education curriculum, especially given that my own home country of Scotland has 100,000 digital tech jobs there, and we need the skills to be there and ready. But while there remains a shortfall in what is delivered in our schools, libraries can fill a gap. Our world is moulded by data and code, and libraries offer young people an opportunity to bring ideas to life and build things that will really bring joy to millions. So by embracing the future, we can continue to be an unrivaled place of learning like we've always been, as libraries have always been for previous generations. Another quote I'd like to use is that from the statement that I think we heard again today, where libraries shall acquire, organise, disseminate information freely and oppose any forms of censorship. And we've heard that from all our previous speakers. But 5 million Europeans, including myself, strongly oppose the EU's copyright directive. But despite protests, it was voted through by the EU Council in April 2019, with member states given 2 years to implement these changes. I think, Louise, you particularly mentioned some of that issue when it came to the question of filtering. But my organisation continues to fight against these proposals, which we feel will have a far-reaching and negative impact on freedom of speech and expression online by introducing blunt content filters, which could stifle the sharing of knowledge. We also fear that the copyright crackdown will have damaging effects on libraries or those carrying out research. So after participating in the Future Text and Data Mining project, which predated the Copyright Directive and focused on the future of text and data mining in the EU, we're following how member states interpret the new rules around what is called as trusted intermediaries, who will be tasked with holding text and data mining outputs, as well as how countries should loosen the reins to make sure technical protection measures are less of an impediment to future researchers. So from policing copyright, the spread of artificial intelligence and tackling inequality to the rise of digital government, the Open Knowledge Foundation believes that crucial decisions taken in the next few years, especially at an EU level, will have the potential to fundamentally change our societies. Because we live in a knowledge society where we face 2 different futures. We face one which is open and one which is closed. A closed future is one where knowledge is exclusively owned and controlled, leading to greater inequality and a closed society. But an open future means knowledge is shared by all, freely available to everyone, a world where people are able to fulfill their potential and live happy and healthy lives. So in conclusion, I believe that libraries are natural partners in our campaign for a fair, free and open future. And I look forward to working with you all to realise that world where knowledge is truly, truly open. Thank you, Martin, for letting me come and speak today. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to the questions that you all may have or hope to have as we go into the panel discussion. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Catherine. You've had a chance now to hear all our 5 speakers, and I hope you've found them useful, stimulating, interesting, and most of all enjoyable. So can I ask you again to thank all our speakers for such good presentations. We do have time for questions. There are 2 microphones in the middle of the hall if you want to ask a question from here. If you do, if you just stand by the microphone and I'll keep an eye open. We do have some questions which have come through on Mentimeter, so I was going to start with a couple of those whilst you're having a thought yourselves. The first one is quite a practical one. It comments that the video quality from Turkey wasn't that high quality, and I think that's always an issue with this sort of presentation, but we felt it was really important to get that perspective from somebody who's living and working in a country where censorship and freedom of speech and freedom of expression is a real challenge. So I think we do recognize that. The name apparently was a bit small on the screen. His name, Ahmed's name, is in the online program, so you can find his name there. It was asked whether it's possible to get his manuscript. We do have a short summary of what the topic he was talking on, so we will contact him and we'll look at converting that into a blog on the FAIF blog page, Speak Up. So keep an eye on that, and we will put it out on the FAIF network email lists as well as the IFLA email list when we have had a chance to talk to him to do that. So we do recognize the limitations of a video link, but we felt it was important that we hear the voice of somebody living and working in that environment. The second one is a broad one, which I'm going to ask the panel to answer because I haven't prompted on this. The question is, what is IFLA doing to advocate for freedom of information in countries with authoritarian regimes? If I can say a little bit to start about the sorts of things that IFLA does do on a regular basis, and then ask the panel to actually think, well, is that appropriate? Are there other things we can be doing, we should be doing? But freedom of access to information and freedom of expression, as I say, is a core value. And so it underpins and is there in virtually every document that IFLA produces and uses for its advocacy. So it underpins and is there in terms of the work on the SDGs about the value and importance of free access to information and freedom of expression to make those work. It's constantly there in the benefits of access to information, access to knowledge through libraries. It's there basically in everything that IFLA does and talks about. And then more specifically, those documents there then to support the work of individual library associations and libraries. IFLA makes the case and makes statements where there are cases and causes for concern, for example, most recently on areas like internet shutdowns. We work with a wide range of partners who share our values to raise our voice against where freedom of information, access to information and freedom of expression is being challenged. And when necessary, we do campaign and make the case on behalf of librarians who can be imprisoned for this work. And that was most recently with a case in Russia. So there's a wide range that IFLA does, most of it in a way by just it being there as part of the argument, as part of the advocacy, and as part of the support in everything that it does. That's very general, but I just wanted to ask the panel, is that enough? In terms of, the point is particularly about advocating in countries with authoritarian regimes. So I'll hand it over to whoever would like to pick that up first. And if you aren't first, you'll be second, third, or fourth.
The fact that you've got a global network, right, and you've got ways that people can support one another is a truly powerful tool that you have. And also the fact that your reach, I mean, the fact that we had the speaker from Turkey just giving us those examples, and you think to yourself, how a country which until quite recently was functioning now with censorship and the tools that they are using against people, even, I mean, we were saying about bringing a library book, you know. So I think that there's a great strength that you have as individuals to support as well as raising when issues are happening against censorship and putting that maybe also on a more political agenda when the opportunity arises, Martin. So I just think you're just very well placed in ways and also can give practical examples, just like those examples we heard today.
If I can just interrupt, apparently Ahmed is still online, so we can ask him the same question.
Great.
And I'll apologise in advance that the video quality will be the same as before, but it'll be good to hear Ahmed's own response to this question.
I was just listening and waiting others to answer first. So
Right.
that I know that like asking librarians to do more is not easy all the time, because as many others in countries like that, they are also having a risk, and especially when it comes to situations like university libraries or public libraries, they are under much more pressure than most of the people. But there will be like one of the things I think librarians can and maybe should do more can be about the helping other people, helping other like students, young people, or in general public, teach them how to reach information even though it is censored or even though the governments are trying to suppress. Because most of the time, this is the main problem we are having, that it's hard to teach public how to find good and quality information, because we see that most of the time when there are censorship, or like I talked about in Turkey, the general mainstream media is talking about always the same things and in the same way, they go to internet to find different opinions or different ideas. But how to do it right, or especially since we are having problems with its famous name, fake news and other stuff, it's important to teach them or help them to find quality information, or how to have a critical perspective when they are doing the research. And I think with their experience and with their expertise, the librarians are the best people to do that. So I think one of the most important things librarians can do will be to help people to learn how to find better information or more information in general.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Can you stay on the line whilst we look at the rest of the questions, please, and we can get your perspective on those as well. Would anybody else like to comment from the panel in the room? Louise?
I don't know whether is the mic working?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a very small comment to add, which is really that, given the importance of this issue, freedom of expression and freedom of information are so important that no one individual can fight alone. And what I think IFLA can do is bring people together, and there is strength in numbers, and I think, that is a really important role for IFLA.
Thank you. Anybody else want to shoot? Thank you. There's one other question just come in, Louise, as you're just on the answer question. And that's that Louise mentioned classification and ratings as a form of censorship. But it's not included in the new statement. Do you think we should challenge these?
Okay. I didn't actually mention it in the presentation, but obviously classifications and ratings can certainly have a role to play in terms of censorship, because first of all, classification tends to reflect a certain worldview and may reflect the kind of information that we have ready access to. Similarly, ratings are based on subjective decisions, and sort of what is rated as maybe sort of adult only, for example, in one cultural context would be rated differently elsewhere. So yes, they can undoubtedly be forms of censorship. The question is how we use them, and how reflective and aware we are. I mean, classification obviously does have a role to play in terms of organizing information in a way that it is accessible to us. So we can't just say there should be no classification, but we need to be reflective and aware of those potential biases, and in our own practice how we use those tools.
Thank you. Is there anything from the EFF that you'd like to comment on that?
I don't think so.
No? Okay, that's fine. Are there any questions in the room? There's one over on that side. I'm sorry, we're very dazzled here. So sorry to appear like this.
Yes.
But if you'd like to give your if you're willing to, if you give your name and where you're from.
My name is Susan Morris. I'm from the United States. My question is for Jenny. You mentioned that the California State Library has dropped LinkedIn Learning in order to protect user privacy. I was wondering if you've had specific experiences working with public libraries, which are government agencies in themselves, who wish to protect user privacy against government agencies.
Thank you for that question. So I think actually the California State Librarian, I'm not sure that they dropped LinkedIn, but they did make a very strong statement that it might be prudent to in the near future, if not right now. So I'm not sure about the exact mechanics, but there was a very strong statement that they are not happy about what LinkedIn is doing. So just kind of a clarification. And then as far as, it sounds like you're asking about kind of the arm of the government that might be public libraries protecting patrons from other parts of the government. Is there any kind of specific use case you're thinking about?
No, there isn't, but it seems to me that public libraries are in a very difficult position when another arm of their own government asks for user information.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that clarification. I think one case that I did not work with personally, but has been a huge inspiration for me, and I think of a lot of other librarians, is the idea of the warrant canary, if you're familiar with that. In the United States, there's a type of government request called a gag order. And that means the government will serve, say, a library with a request for government information with a requirement that they cannot tell anyone about the request, the details of the request, the existence of the request. They are gagged, they are silenced. So librarians on the East Coast of the United States kind of pioneered the art of the warrant canary. There was a page on their website that said, "We have not received any government orders." And once they received a government order, that page disappeared. So they didn't say anything. They didn't say that they had gotten a request. It was the absence of saying anything that signaled to people that there may have been some kind of request. Of course, that's not complete transparency, but when they were legally bound, right, by an arm of the government, that might have threatened them with shutting down or financial resources or legal action if they didn't comply, librarians still found a way to somehow alert users that there was something going on behind the scenes. Does that sort of answer your question of an example?
Yes, it's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions in the room? Yep. We've got somebody just making their way to the microphone.
Hello, my name is Hendrik Schröder. I'm from Germany, and my question is for Ms. Gebhardt as well. I would like to know certain websites may not function to their full extent if you use something like uBlock or you do not consent to their cookie policy. Is there any way to circumvent that? So, because if you implement something like that for the users, they may not have a satisfying experience in the library.
Thank you. That is a fantastic question and really a practical problem that an organization that develops one of those tools, Privacy Badger, we are dealing with every day, right? How do you deal with, for example, a tool like Privacy Badger might think that a CDN, a content delivery network, is a tracker, and that breaks your website. It might find an ad that's tracking you in a page, but somehow its interaction with the rest of the web page breaks the website. Yes, at the end of the day, you get all these broken websites. Sometimes it's not even clear to the user that it's because of uBlock origin, like you said, or Privacy Badger. The internet is so broken that many users just say like, okay, I guess it won't load, and go on their way. I see you nodding. Yes, you are familiar with this problem. I think that it's a trade-off, right? With any privacy tool or security tool, it's a trade-off. The optimistic part of me says that it will get better. Tools like Privacy Badger, Disconnect, uBlock, they'll continue refining. In addition to sometimes it not being clear how or why a site broke, there are many users who are very clear on why the site broke, and they have our email address, and they let us know. And we respond to every single one of those notifications. It's always looking to see, what small thing has fallen through the cracks and is creating an experience that is going to make people not want to use privacy protective tools. So I think one of the big things, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, is to somehow make it clear to users, this might break a website. Here are websites that are known to be broken recently. Here's how you can turn it off for a single website. That's a really nice functionality a lot of these blockers and tools have that isn't immediately clear. You can just say, oh, turn it off just for this website. I want it on all the other times, but for this website, stay out of my way, ad blocker, tracker blocker. So I think some kind of education or awareness around the ways you can take control of those tools to control your experience might be a step until the time that they all become perfect and perfectly frictionless privacy protecting tools in the future.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks for your effort.
Thanks.
Has anybody else got any other questions in the hall? Well, we've got just a few minutes, so I'll perhaps finish with one more question we have on Mentimeter, and that's can we talk a little bit about how Faith looks on libraries promoting Tor browser or other tools for anonymous surfing. I wonder if you'd just like to say a little bit about what Tor browser is and why it's, what's particular about it and why libraries could or should promote it. And then I'll ask Brent to say a little bit about what Faith's been doing in that area.
Yes, Tor browser, very exciting. So Tor is a browser like Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer, but what it does is it anonymizes your internet traffic. Tor, T-O-R, actually stands for the Onion Router, a whimsical name, because it works in layers. So instead of my web traffic, let's say I am accessing a news site. Instead of it going straight from me to that news site, it will take all sorts of hops. I think usually a minimum of 3. I'm not completely clear on the technical details right now, but it will take lots of hops. It will funnel my internet traffic through all these other places, and then it will look like someone else somewhere random in the world is accessing that news site. It protects me. And all those different hops are called Tor nodes, and they're actually run by real people in real places who are, for different reasons, taking on the risk of running just a bunch of anonymous internet traffic through their servers. And sometimes libraries run Tor nodes, and why a library might be interested in doing that is because it's very concretely and in an extremely meaningful, useful way contributing to this global infrastructure of anonymous web browsing, really the most powerful anonymous browsing that we have available. And it's simply not possible if people don't volunteer or don't contribute to that infrastructure, right? Imagine if there were one person running a Tor node. If I were a government and wanted to know about somebody who is using Tor, I'd know whose door to knock on. But having lots of people involved in Tor and lots of different nodes run in lots of different places adds to that obfuscation and adds to that anonymity. Tor is the greatest.
I'll just mention that while Faith as a committee doesn't tend to focus on promoting a specific technology and so on because these things change. It has talked about the importance of privacy on the internet, of course, in a more general way, and a number of the statements that have emanated from the committee over the years have supported the use of such technologies. A couple of years ago, the Faith Committee worked with CILIP to do a whole day on programming in London on internet privacy, and there was quite a bit of discussion of specific technologies like Tor, and it was very interesting. And then 2 years ago as well, at the IFLA conference, a good part of the Faith session also discussed, and also with the help of the EFF, the use of anonymizing browsers and such. So certainly there's a clear role, and there are probably other areas in IFLA that would probably take a more specific look at the use of specific technologies, but clearly it's important.
One more thing to know about Tor, sometimes in media coverage or just hearing about the tool, you might hear it associated with the dark web and very scary criminals and drug dealers and shady people doing shady things with their anonymous tool. What you hear less about is all the people who really, really need Tor, and I imagine as librarians you are very familiar with them. Journalists, people who want to leak classified materials or otherwise need anonymity and protection to share information with journalists or other people, survivors of domestic abuse who really need to protect their identity and their location. So while certainly anonymous tools can have all sorts of nefarious uses, the uses to protect vulnerable people are just, to me, so outweigh those dangers that maintaining and protecting a tool like Tor is as important as ever.
Thank you. We're just about time, but I think I'd just like to open up to the panel, including you, Ahmed. If there's anything you'd like to say just to wrap today's session up. We've covered a lot of ground, and I think it's been a very good discussion, but there's a chance to just have, if there's any final words you'd like to add in, perhaps in the direction that a review of the intellectual freedom statement should go if in the future.
This is probably, is the microphone working? Yeah, okay. It's probably more just a speculation or a question without a clear answer, but, and I'll just pose the question just as something to think about, but I think very often in our discussions in IFLA, we sometimes focus on problems that are manageable. And for example, certainly it's very useful and good to use a Tor in the US, for example. But the US is not China. And I wonder if sometimes we forget to talk about a really big issue like countries where there are huge firewalls and such, just because it seems so intractable. Where does one even start? Is there complete deafness, in that country, and so I wonder if we tend to work on problems that are a little bit more easier to deal with in countries where we know how to deal with them, but in some situations we know it's a lot tougher, and I think that is an obvious place where IFLA's work will be important.
Ahmed, is there anything else you'd like to add? Well,
I read the draft of the declaration before the speech, and I think it's a really important stuff, but I also agree with the earlier remarks, especially the countries like the China, Russia, Turkey. It shows us what kind of the dark future can come because of the political advancements we are unfortunately seeing in the different countries around the world. And I think IFLA, although has a good start, maybe start thinking about, but not just IFLA or librarians, but everyone who works in the works for freedom of information, can start thinking about how these experiences can repeat itself in different countries and how this kind of pressure can be fought back against. Because, like, for example, with the question before that was about the Tor browser and how it can be used, but Tor browser is unfortunately censored in Turkey, and if you want to download it, you have to jump over some blocks and you have to do some tricks to even download that. And although librarians can manage to do that, I don't think that seeing that installed in a library computer would be really nice for them, really nice experience for them. So I think we should also think about the extremes like the China, the Turkey in some cases, or Russia, and see what else can be done or what can be done against those extremes, because unfortunately there are many political groups who tries to copy that extremes in their own countries, and this can be a lot of headaches and a lot of troubles for the librarians over there.
Thank you. Any final words from anyone else? No? Well, my final words are simply to thank you all for coming. I hope you found today interesting and useful, and we look forward to seeing you at future FAVE sessions. Thank you for coming.